Sharon Thomas with NARUC. Thank you for joining us today for a webinar presentation on what blockchain is, how it's currently being used, and the potential that it holds for use in additional applications. I need to mention that this webinar is being recorded and that by participating in it, you're consenting to being part of the webcast. Both the slides and the recording will be available on the NARUC website within a few days at naruc.org/lab. And from there, you just click on past meetings to find the recording. This webcast is being done as part of an award that NARUC received from the Department of Commerce, specifically the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and so we'd like to thank them for their continued support. During the webinar, we're going to have everyone on mute except for the presenters and the moderator in order to manage the background noise. And to ask questions, please use the questions function in the webinar software that's on the right-hand toolbar. And feel free to submit your questions throughout the presentation. And at the end, we'll have around 20 minutes to take questions from the audience. Commissioner Wagner from the Iowa Utilities Board will be our moderator for today. And with that, I will turn things over to you, Commissioner.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and welcome everybody to what I hope is a very informational webinar. If most of you are like me, you have no idea what blockchain means, and so this will be a great learning experience. We've got two individuals today who are both very well versed and know absolutely what it means. So they'll be helping guide us through today's webinar. And first off, we will start with Lawrence Orsini from LO3 Energy, and he's the founder of LO3 Energy, a groundbreaking energy and tech company that's working on innovative new hardware and software products within the emerging and continued distributed energy and computation industry. It has a wide range of experience in the energy sector, from deployment of policy and regulatory frameworks to relationship management on energy solutions with Fortune 100 utility corporate clients. Prior to LO3, Lawrence was director of new products for Clear Result, working as a strategic lead on the development, piloting, and development of new utility service offerings. These focused on energy efficiency, microgrids, load management for commercial, industrial, and residential market sectors. And after Lawrence is through with his presentation, we'll move on to Jennifer O'Rourke. Jennifer is, oops, sorry, I lost my place there. Jennifer is at the Illinois Blockchain Business Liaison, where she focuses on supporting distributed ledger technology development throughout the state of Illinois, and the Deputy Director of the Office of Entrepreneurship, Innovation, and Technology at the Illinois Department of Commerce, where she leads projects focusing on economic development throughout the entire state. O'Rourke is also the Director of Public Engagement at the Chicago Blockchain Center, and prior to this, she held a number of strategic and market development positions in the financial services industry. She attended the University of London, where she received a Master's of Arts, and at the University of Illinois, where she received a Bachelor of Arts. So as I mentioned, we have two very talented and experienced panelists in the field of blockchain. And so with that, Lawrence, we will go ahead and kick it off to you.
Thanks so much for that terrific introduction. So I'm going to speak at a pretty high level about blockchain. This is Blockchain 101. So I'll probably talk about Bitcoin and Ethereum first. These are financial blockchains, and then we will dig into LO3's physical blockchain based on energy and talk a bit about what we're doing with it as a use case. So for those folks maybe a little bit familiar with Bitcoin, it is a financial blockchain that is being used now to trade a token that's tied to various currencies around the planet. So this foundational blockchain component is really being used to securely transact dollars and enable the transaction of dollars across the globe at this point. It does it in a pretty interesting way. Blockchain at its core is a pretty simple technology, and I think we'll switch to the next slide. It's a pretty simple technology that allows you It's a distributed database that allows you to record transactions in real time across a distributed network of computers that host a distributed ledger. This distributed ledger, you can think of it kind of like a distributed database. So the nodes on the ledger itself having the same information on the database. There's an additional layer of security to this from a couple of perspectives. So for one, since the ledger itself is actually distributed at this point with Bitcoin and Ethereum on computers across the planet, it makes it very resilient. So if there is an attack or a hack on one or two of the nodes that were actually hosting this distributed ledger, it wouldn't have an effect, and hasn't at this point had an effect on the blockchain itself. So what happens when you're transacting across this blockchain? At its most basic form is you and a counterparty are deciding to transact either usually a token that represents some sort of a dollar value. The blockchain itself, based on these computers that are distributed across the planet, is then running a cryptographic algorithm. This cryptographic algorithm is called a hash. What this hash is doing, the entire network is trying to solve a very hard cryptographic problem. So the network, as soon as one of the nodes solves the problem, then the network itself verifies that the problem has indeed been solved, and then the entire network updates to the next block. Every time that this network is updated, it creates a new block. This is a block of transactions. So between blocks, the transactions that had occurred are then recorded into the ledger. This ledger is then downloaded or updated on each one of the nodes, which gives you the benefit of having it distributed across many nodes on the planet, a lot of different people having the same information at the same time. Because of the distributed nature of this ledger, it makes it very hard to change, almost impossible to change anything that happens on this ledger. So every block that is recorded and distributed across the network is visible across the network itself. So you have a really good history in time of all of the digital transactions that have happened across this ledger. We can go to the next slide, please. So because each one of these things, the blockchain itself is actually stored on these computers in both Bitcoin and the Ethereum blockchains, you can actually participate yourself as a node in this network. So you, with your very own computer, could download an algorithm, download the history of the blockchain itself, and have your computer working on the very same cryptographic hash. The network rewards monetarily folks that are actually mining. They call it mining, which is solving the cryptographic problem. Rewards those miners by issuing tokens. So the value of the token gets converted into dollars, and the miners are paid a bounty for solving that cryptographic hash. So in the Ethereum blockchain, there are many people that are using fairly typical computing power to actually mine the blockchain itself. In the Bitcoin network, it's a relatively few number of miners that are using pretty sophisticated, I'd say, compute technology called ASICs, application-specific hardware that is just designed to mine that actual blockchain. So in order to be successful in mining, you would have to buy one of those ASIC devices to mine. Let's go to the next slide, please. The benefit of the blockchain itself is that the transactions, the history of all of the transactions that have been transacted across any of these blockchains is visible publicly throughout the history of the blockchain itself. So you need to some of the information can actually be encrypted. You would need to have the encryption keys to be able to look at it, and there are several ways that you can actually protect some of the information and some of the new blockchains that are being formed. But the real benefit is that once a transaction is recorded, there is never any question about that transaction's validity, because the transaction's been recorded across many thousands of computers that have the same information at the same time. So it's a very secure and resilient and transparent method of transacting value, not only dollars, but information or control as well. You can go to the next slide. So now I'll talk a little bit about what LO3 Energy is doing, who we are, and how we're using blockchain, which is slightly different than the way the financial blockchains are using it. And the next slide. So LO3 Energy was formed in about 2012. The company, as mentioned in the bio, we have a real focus. I've had a focus in energy for about the last 17 years, working with utilities across the country on the adoption of new technology, taking new efficiency, distributed generation, demand response or demand control technologies to some scale in markets. So the folks that work with us here at LO3 have pretty diverse backgrounds. There's a good core group that have backgrounds in markets as well as utility technology adoption, and then hardware and software development, specifically around energy and blockchain. We'll look at the next slide, please. So working in the energy industry, being involved pretty deeply, we've been watching through the years as the proliferation of distributed generation has really started to increase and is moving at some scale into the market. So solar, renewable energies, combined heat and power, wind technologies are all moving up and moving to the grid edge. It's really interesting to note that in the last year, according to some recent Bloomberg reports, in the US, about half of the distributed generation, the solar distributed generation specifically, has not gone on utility scale power plants. It's actually gone on rooftops. So previously, there's been a real focus on utility scale in order, I think, to bring down some of the costs necessarily to get this technology distributed to market. But here recently, there's been a shift, due largely to the drops in cost that is really putting the technology in people's hands. Next slide, please. Can we have the next slide? Thank you. So the technology itself, solar specifically, is causing a number of problems across utility grids, or on utility grids across the planet. Due to its somewhat intermittent transmission, when the sun comes up and the system starts to produce energy, that energy is transient. So you can see on the left diagram here, this is the somewhat infamous duck curve. This is the load curve of the California ISO. So as this technology has been adopted and pushed out into the market, what used to be a pretty predictable sort of mountain-shaped curve has turned into this interesting curve that resembles this duck shape. So it's not a terrible thing that PV is actually going in, and it's actually fairly predictable. But what's happening is it's creating a lot of frothy consumption at the shoulders of that trough, where generation, demand, response, and storage are needing to really fill in. So it's creating some difficulties across California at this point from a physical perspective, as well as a financial perspective. In fact, recently here in California, they've seen the first few instances of negative pricing across the utility grid in California, which is pretty, it's actually pretty common in Germany, but hasn't happened in the US to the point to date. Next slide, please. So there's a really good report, an Accenture report that was done over a number of years. I believe it was 10 years with 13,000 different participants in this report. Really focused on energy and talking with people about their relationship to energy. Some of the things that really surprised me in this report, and sort of our focus has been, if you look on the upper left there, the idea that about 70% of consumers that participated in this report are ready to participate in an energy market today. It's not 5 years from now, that's actually today. The other interesting component is that almost half of the consumers that were involved in this report are ready to buy locally generated renewable energy from their community today as well. So these are pretty strong consumer drivers that I think the industry agrees is really going to continue to ramp up the adoption of these technologies. Next slide, please. So that creates a number of issues that we've been watching pretty closely. Today, the grid is, built in, to be very unidirectional, pushing energy from large power plants at the grid center to the grid edge. So that grid architecture is not very resilient when it comes to adopting technologies at the grid edge that produce energy. It's not made to be a bidirectional utility grid. Most utility business models today, specifically in the US, but generally speaking across the world, do not encourage distributed energy resources. Utilities generally don't get compensated, except in some very progressive regulatory regimes, don't get compensated for distributed resources. So there's a mismatch between technology, policy, and business models that are really at the center of this disruption that's happening at this point from a distributed generation perspective. You've got consumers on one side evolving into a new entity on the grid, prosumers, producers and consumers of energy that are putting energy onto a grid that's not quite ready to accept bidirectional flows. And you've got utility business models that are locked in by regulation that prevent them from adequately responding to this new form of business in the energy industry. And one of the more important ones is that last bullet there, controlling small-scale distributed energy resources at the grid edge is very hard to do. The control systems to do large-scale control of IoT devices at the grid edge have not been built yet today. And that's really what a market's looking for. Next slide, please. So LO3 Energy has been, we actually formed the company to solve some of these problems. And they're developing a transactive energy platform that is based on the blockchain technology we had discussed to help work through some of these barriers that are arising in the energy industry. Next slide, please. Actually, I think we can slip past this slide. We just talked through the blockchain component of it. So next. So we've developed our own hardware and blockchain software solution hosted on these transactive grid meters. These meters are actually going side by side with existing utility meters, and they're acting as nodes, much as people are using their computers to host the compute horsepower of the Bitcoin or Ethereum network. These meters are actually hosting a private blockchain. So they're doing some of the very same functions. They are hashing a cryptographically hard problem and actually recording information about the production, consumption, and grid state. So volts, VARs, information about actual grid telemetry into the blockchain and distributing that across the network itself so that that information can be used across the platform. Next slide, please. So through the network, we're setting up, we have set up a transactive energy market. Actually, we're setting up several of them currently. The one that's progressed the most is here in Brooklyn, New York. So the communities of Park Slope, Gowanus, and Borum Hill are participating at this point. That platform, like I said, is based on open source, cryptographically secure protocol, this blockchain protocol. That is really a method of sort of distributing information. We're using it as a communications platform. We're not using it as a platform specifically to transfer dollars or monetary components like a traditional cryptocurrency. You can see the red area there is one of the networks here. There's a little box in the center of the Google screen there. That's a physical microgrid that we are developing with the platform along with a partner, Siemens, and other generation partners that in the future will be able to physically separate from the utility grid, run on its own generation if there's a need to do that. It will largely run grid parallel, but if there is a need to do that, should there be a blackout or another superstorm like Sandy, then that area would actually run on its own power. So two things happening here in Brooklyn with the transaction of energy between consumers and prosumers across this virtual microgrid, and then the transaction or the development of an actual physical microgrid as well. Next slide, please. So the community here in Brooklyn is really interested in this for a number of reasons. With the blockchain technology, what we're really doing is tokenizing the production, consumption, storage, and transport cost of energy. So we can build that into this token, into this discrete piece of information that we can use to transact as value. This token is being used to create peer-to-peer markets, so allowing people in the community to actually account for the net energy that they're producing that's going back onto the utility grid. That net energy then can then be is hosted in a market and can be purchased or consumed by a consumer that's in the market as well. So because we're using the blockchain technology, we know with certainty where the energy came from, when it was made, who made it, how much is in the market, who bought it, and all of that information is kept in this blockchain platform in a very secure fashion. So that's really driving interest among prosumers in the community here. As you can imagine, if you have the ability, and here people are actually interested in buying this at a premium, locally generated Brooklyn electrons generated by their neighbors. They're very interested in buying those things from their neighbors for many different reasons. One of them being circular economy effects. If I'm buying energy from my neighbor, I know that those dollars are going to stay in the community. If I'm a business and I'm buying energy from, my customers, which are in the community, then that's some pretty low-cost marketing for something, for a budget that I'm typically looking at as overhead, as energy cost. So lots of ways that that's benefiting the community here in Brooklyn. Next slide, please. So at this point in Brooklyn, we have about a megawatt of existing generation that is has meters installed and is currently recording generation. We have about 300 consumers that are ready to participate in the market. We're in the final stages of discussions with the regulators here on the final form of the microgrid entity itself. Brooklyn Microgrid is a benefits corporation meant to be significantly owned by the community. So very significant community interest and participation in the project itself. Next slide. So unfortunately, the graphic was a little bit flattened on these slides. So it doesn't actually show what I was hoping to show you in the app, which is, the app is really built to give very easy ways for consumers to interact differently with energy in ways that they've not been able to before. So ways that they can choose the fuel source very discreetly, whether or not it's coming from a coal-fired power plant, natural gas, regional wind or REC-based energy, or even here produced in the community. And then use a very simple slider to set their willingness to pay for that energy. So the more green energy that you're hoping to buy from the community that generates these community benefits, there is a pretty strong competition for those green electrons. So in setting up this app so that the community can actually engage with it, we're providing a couple of really good pieces of feedback that this community's never had before. So they really haven't known what the real value of green energy and green environmental benefits happening right in the community. You've not been able to see this. This has been it's been hidden behind a REC market, a renewable energy certification market that doesn't really show you where your energy came from. So the other side of the coin is as we start to roll the platform out, folks that are interested in investing in solar or community plants now see that there's a potential for actually a much better payback on a system like this, because you've got 200 consumers that are actually looking to consume local green energy and could be willing to pay a price premium for it. There are other components to it as well. We're looking at demand response as part of the platform, and then battery storage as part of the platform as well. Next slide. So to follow up, we've got the first peer-to-peer transactions occurred in April of last year here in Brooklyn. They're still underway. We have demonstration projects underway not only here in Brooklyn, but a couple of other places around the globe. Another spot in Texas kicking off here soon. We have strategic partnerships with several large infrastructure partners, as well as market makers and universities and institutes across the globe. Next slide. So at this point, we have a handful of projects across the US here, several in Germany, one's very close in the UK, several in Australia, and we are looking at one or two in South America right now. These projects are testing different business models, different ways that people can engage around energy in a transactive platform that's enabled by blockchain. Next slide. So the real driver of this, and hopefully a few of you got a chance to watch the video that was circulated beforehand, the real driver of this is people like Adrian here, who have decided it's time for things to change a bit. If they can buy their own equipment to generate electricity, in some ways that means it's their electrons, and they ought to be able to do new and interesting things with them. So this is consumer driven, and it's going to be more and more consumer driven as we go. LO3 Energy is looking to build the platform that allows this consumer interaction and choice in a transactive energy platform. Next slide. And that's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you, Lawrence. That was very interesting. And I would remind the audience that if you have questions, please jot them in the questions box on the right side of your control panel. And next, we'll have Jennifer give her presentation.
Thanks for that, Nick. Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. So when Nick introduced me earlier, he shared that I am the Illinois Blockchain Business Liaison. So essentially, I think a good place to start is, why does the state of Illinois have a business liaison for this particular technology to begin with? So that being said, state of Illinois initiated the Illinois Blockchain Initiative at the back end of last year, because we recognize that this technology has incredible impact, obviously, to your industry here, but also to many others. And so whether it's use cases around utility, energy, and vending those services to transition our constituents to business models that include peer-to-peer markets, or whether that's to think about how that's going to impact identity, the way that we administer hospital records, think about birth certificates, deliver education records and college transcripts between potential employers and our education and academic universities. We recognize that there's going to be a significant amount of impacts to the way that we do business and the business models that all of these companies we support, the way that they're thinking about how this could change and how they may be impacted. So for all of those reasons, we took a long, hard look at the technology last year. And through that diligence process, came to the conclusion that Lawrence and the folks at LO3, and I hope the majority of you on the call have already or will soon be coming to the conclusion that this technology is most certainly here to stay. The toothpaste is out of the tube, and it really does become simply a matter of throwing yourself into it to become as educated as possible, as quickly as possible. So with that being said, why don't we go ahead and progress the slide, and I'll tell you a little bit about the initiative. So the initiative is composed of 6 organizations within the state of Illinois. 5 of these are state-level organizations, and 1 is a municipality. So I come from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, and the Illinois Blockchain Business Liaison role sits in that office because we recognize the need for engagement of our business stakeholders and that larger community. And so thus the liaison role was developed for that reason. Next, we also have partnership with our IT department, the Department of Innovation and Technology. Here's where it starts to get really interesting, because following suit, we have membership from 2 regulatory bodies. First, the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, and then second, the Illinois Department of Insurance. And this becomes incredibly unique right now because our partnership was founded on the basis that if we're going to make real lasting change to support this technology and forward the community that's utilizing it, we need to be very thoughtful, not just about the technology itself, but of the constraints upon the technology, which in many ways right now are focused on governance and regulation. So in having initial partnership from these 2 departments, we're able to think very deeply about the challenges that industry is facing because of previous and sometimes antiquated regulations, but we're also able to work with the private sector to understand unintended consequences of the implementation of the technology and be very thoughtful about how we go ahead and continue to protect the market participants and the market infrastructure itself, which regulators always have a focus on those 2 things, as we make sure we make the technology more accessible to our constituents and we, again, forward the development thereof as much as possible. The next and the remaining members of our initiative are also unique because they should tie back very quickly to potential use cases in your mind. So we have the Illinois Pollution Control Board and the Cook County Recorder of Deeds. So the Illinois Pollution Control Board is going to call to a use case with regard to land title registration. And, excuse me, I misspoke there. The Illinois Pollution Control Board is going to call to a use case with regard to renewable energy markets. And then our partners in the Cook County Recorder of Deeds will then call to use case in land title registration. The other unique component of this is that Cook County Recorder of Deeds obviously is not a state-level participant. So one of our goals was to replicate the needs of the network, and in doing so, recognize that the network cannot be siloed to a particular already in the process of engaging with other agencies outside of the state to make sure that we can build out the most robust networks that we can in partnership that will align with the needs of the actual IT network itself as well. So we can move on to the next slide. And we'll actually keep on going here and talk a little bit about some of the role that the government has in this distributed economy. So I don't want to spend too much time on this because I know that this will be distributed to everyone afterwards, so you can kind of drill into it. And I apologize for, you know, it looks like this particular slide got flattened a bit here as we transition from PowerPoint to PDF. But what's important here that I would want you to take away from this is that through that diligence process that I talked about last year that we engaged in, we were able to pull out the components that we think are most important to government that technology provides. So a few of those obviously are security and privacy, and the balance there between. Inclusion and participation, and obviously the distributed network is something that resolves for that. And then the trust and integrity, which is principal to distributed ledger technologies first and foremost. So I won't dwell on this too much because I know Lawrence did a great job of walking through the technology and the value proposition of the technology. But this is something that, you know, when you take this away, if you have more time to dip into it afterwards, it's going to be framed from a government value proposition perspective. And we can move on to the next slide. So this is where the rubber meets the road for the Illinois Blockchain Initiative. Like I said, we spent this time evaluating the technology. We found the results of to be that the technology was here to stay, and we wanted to do our best to make sure that we were at the spear's edge of it. So what does that mean? How do we actually participate in supporting this technology? Well, when we asked ourselves that question, we found the answer was we needed to be doing three things. We needed to be supporting the ecosystem and looking at an economic development opportunity here. We needed to be modernizing governance and seeing where regulation was working and didn't need to be touched and where it could use some adjustment. And then finally, we needed to integrate the technology into the government itself. So how and when do we actually use distributed ledger technology to better provide our products and our services? We can go to the next slide. So starting with the first component of the strategy, developing an ecosystem. There were three things that really jumped off the page to us. The first was that we need to have development talent. So our responsibility would be to foster that talent there. In doing so, we've partnered with some of our top-tier education research and development education facilities here, such as University of Chicago, Northwestern University, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, IIT, and DePaul. We've been able to pull those education and program into events that we're hosting at the Chicago Blockchain Center. So right now we have an avenue to actually provide for engagement of the community who will have varying degrees of knowledge and experience, but will have a port of call to speak with some of the market leaders and academics that we have at our disposal because, again, of this incredible academic network we have here in the state of Illinois, and then also because of the business that we're doing here. The second thing we know is that we need to support entrepreneurship. So building those relationships with entrepreneurs. Again, the launch of the Chicago Blockchain Center was instrumental in this because we do have that flag in the ground now to bring our entrepreneurs to a physical and a singular location where we can better understand their needs, their company's needs, and then we can work to provide that bespoke, discrete education and programming to meet those needs. And lastly, collaboration with enterprise. This is that bridge between having the talent, turning the talent of a project or an idea into a business, into an entrepreneur, and then connecting them to the rest of the value chain so that they can either work with the company to solve the company's problems, sell their products and services to the company through licensing, or be acquired by that company. But those are our goals, so to help and facilitate one of those outcomes with the private sector and with enterprise. Next slide, please. So if we drill into the second component of our strategy, governing distributed ledgers. Again, I'll leave this slide for you to look at in more detail, but what I would want you to take away from this is that we are looking to modernize governance to facilitate a distributed economy, which is very different than the way that governance previously was enacted for the way that economy previously was run. So as we've evolved, we recognize that there's a need to evolve the way that we govern with the way that we do business. To that end, we think that there's a three-step process that we can go down to be successful in that transition. First is that as we think about governance and as we think about laws, rules, and regulations, we want to make sure that broad policy goals and principles are the starting point. We want to make sure that our policymakers are informed and educated and that they aren't coming up to speed on the back end or they aren't making decisions about things they don't completely understand. Second, we realize that there needs to be a standards participation from a government perspective. What I mean by this is that when standards are created within different industries or different silos, there's a chance that the standards that are created for the financial service sector will end up touching upon the health service sector, because as you utilize the technology to hold your healthcare records, you may be utilizing the technology to pay a bill for seeing your doctor. So we want to make sure that that can work together and that an interoperability factor is incorporated, again, from the beginning, so that you as a singular participant can move between different industries or different processes without getting caught up or bogged down by lack of interoperability. So a unified or as close to as possible standards protocol. Again, these are talking about larger goals here, but recognizing that our job is to start a conversation now so that we don't deal with larger problems when we come into them in the end. If we can start having those conversations now, then the conversation we participate in will hopefully lead to one that makes it easier for you to move between multiple industries or multiple business models without feeling as much friction as a participant. The last piece of this is going to be technical code. And so thinking about how this is going to, like the nuances of technical code will tie into various degrees of broader policies and principles is something that we have our eye on, again, from the beginning. Next slide, please. So the last piece of our strategy is integrating government. Again, how do we in the government use the technology ourselves to better provide products and services? So we feel here in the Illinois Blockchain Initiative that all of these various use cases in many ways can be pulled into two broad areas. The first being identity, and the second being asset and ownership registration. So although this doesn't account for every single use case out there, broadly, we find that most fall into these two categories. And so as such, we recognize that government is also the holder of identity, or one of the many holders of identity. And what I mean by that is the Secretary of State is the one who issues you your state ID card or your driver's license. The hospital, which has ties into the Department of Health and Human Resources, is going to be the organization that issues your child's birth certificate. Social Security number will be issued, and all of those things will be housed in your county's registrar, and then will eventually be housed at a state level as well. So from that perspective, and we can think about many others that have touch points into identity, that may essentially sit in the private sector, for instance, your bank account, your mortgage, things like that. They all do have touch points into the process where government addresses identity, or government holds identity. We also know that government is a holder of registration. So whether that be the registration for your home or your boat or your car, those sit with government right now. So that being said, if we look at the way that we have all of these databases that are duplicative in many ways, but have a similarity in the sense that government acts as an initiator or a holder, we see that there's an opportunity to utilize this technology to architect a smarter, more efficient, and more secure way of being a holder of this identity. Now, that being said, and I won't go too deep into this, we're actually very excited of the idea of self-sovereign identity, which would transition government away from holding identity to instead attesting to or validating identity. But that can be another conversation. So we can move to the next slide. So again, just to drill into this a little bit further and think about some of those use cases that I referred to, the shared economy, public transportation, the idea of tokenizing tax credits, distributing emergency aid and grants in particular, and then demand-based service marketplaces. And as with before, I will leave all of the detailed reading to you, but I think that this gives you a nice idea of the breadth of the way that the technology can be utilized, again, to better provide these products and services. Next slide, please. And we'll go to the next one as well. So essentially, we've been talking a lot about who the initiative is composed of and the strategy of the initiative. But now I'm excited to share with you what we've done and what we plan on doing going forward. This slide will just move through again and actually jump to the next one already, because it really just sums up some of the work that we've done and how it falls into the three prongs of the strategy. Instead, let's talk in detail about what we have done. So like I said, the back end of last year, we launched the initiative. When we launched the initiative, our Department of Financial and Professional Regulation issued guidance on cryptocurrency. So that falls squarely into category 2, the governance and regulation component of our strategy. So they issued this digital currency guidance, and what it said explicitly was that because of volume transactions for Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, at this point, cryptocurrency is not being most commonly used to transact products and services. To be clear, we're not saying that it is not being used. It most certainly is, but we're talking about the volumes of which it is being used. And because those volumes are so small when compared with a credit card swipe, at this point in time, our financial regulators did not see a need to impose additional levels of regulation upon cryptocurrency. This was really exciting because what this did was it positioned us antithetical to some states that have actually done that, where they found that their Transmitter of Monies Act, or the regulations that require additional know your client and anti-money laundering regulation for different types of banking institutions or services that, institutions that provide bank-like services. We found that when other states had required extra levels of regulation in this space, we did not see the need to do so. And as a quick comparison, there is a regulation in the state of New York called BitLicense. And so when this came out, this was, again, to solve for questions around how cryptocurrencies participated in the economy. And the result was that there needed to be regulation to solve for it. What we found was that in the time between that regulation coming out and today, there have been 3 companies which have successfully attained a BIT license, but there have been over 3 dozen which have left the state of New York. And so we wanted to make sure that while we support our system participants and the financial system itself, we don't want to throttle it for undue reasons. So that was really exciting to kick off the initiative with that guidance. Immediately after that, we issued a RFI for blockchain applications and how they could be used in the public sector. That obviously falls into our government integration component of our strategy. We were really pleased to have about 25 results from our RFI. We attained results from all of the major consultancies, all of the major large technology firms, and we even had a few international respondents and, of course, a few startups. So we had an incredible breadth of information that we diligently reviewed and became very valuable for us as we continued. Next, over the course of early 2017, excuse me, we joined membership with R3, Hyperledger, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, the Digital Chamber of Commerce, and also BEN, the Blockchain Educators Network, which is a student-level education network. We did all of these because we realized the value of being an active participant in these organizations, and the value being the access to the market participants, to trends in the market, and generally to knowledge. Again, one of our largest goals of this strategy is to make sure that we are as fully informed from day one, so that we do not have to make uninformed reactionary decisions on day 3, 4, 5. These memberships have given us that access to information, in addition to allowing us to build out very strong relationships with market participants, and furthermore to share our knowledge and our experience with those that are seeking answers to questions they have about how to interact and participate with government. Just last month, we opened the Chicago Blockchain Center, which was an incredible ribbon-cutting ceremony where we were able to convene all of the incredible participants in the local community here in Illinois. What we'll be doing next with the Chicago Blockchain Center is really exciting. We're going to start hosting all of our community meetups at the center. We're going to be working with an incredible cryptographer based out of University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, Professor Andrew Miller, who's going to be hosting a 3-day smart contract for us at the end of the summer, where we'll be able to engage the community, whether it's students and professionals, and have them further develop their development skills as they build and learn from the best on how to build these smart contracts. We're looking to engage with other participants from specific industries within the state. So in Illinois, we call home to 4 major industries: financial services, insurance, supply chain and logistics, and healthcare. So using those frames, we will be focused on pulling in corporate partners from all 4 of those verticals to put them in front of a room of developers and actually talk through use cases to make sure that there's subject matter expertise knowledge share between the corporate participants who are looking for the solutions and the developers who we find in their own spare time are building out these these projects on evenings and weekends just out of personal interest. So we want to put them together industry by industry and see how we can, again, support and coordinate that development. The other thing that we're doing is we are in middle stage of our proof of concepts that we are developing. So what I mean by middle stage, and we'll get into this more in a couple slides down the row, is that we have a pilot roadmap for 2017 where we thoroughly focus on the 3rd component of our strategy, the integration into the government itself. And with that, we are working on them right now, and we'll have more work to do throughout the end of 2017. The other really exciting thing that we are about to step into is that we are calling July Blockchain Month, and we are kicking off Blockchain Month with IBI Hack. And if you're interested, you could go to www.illinoisblockchain.org, which is the hackathon's website. So in partnership with BEN, the Blockchain Educators Network, the student organization, the state of Illinois and the Illinois Blockchain Initiative are hosting a month-long remote hackathon where we're putting out a variety of problem statements, but one of them is, how can your project in the hackathon help the Illinois government provide its products and services better, faster, more efficiently, more secure? So we're really excited about giving, and this is scoped at the eligible participants are current students at any level or recent grads. So we're explicitly engaging our students so that we can build out the talent pipeline, and we can then have access to that talent pipeline, and we can connect them to potential employers. So we're really, really excited about that. The remote faculty of this hackathon is very valuable because we're making this eligible to anyone, not just Illinois students. And so anyone can participate. And to that same end, we're very excited to support all students in our endeavor to connect them with potential employers. As we look forward to the rest of the year, we will be forming the Illinois Blockchain Task Force, which is a legislative effort and is in the process of being finalized with our General Assembly. So that will be an advisory committee. And then lastly, we'll be putting out a white paper that will give information on our pilots and the status thereof. Next slide, please. So again, we've touched on this before, but this slide speaks to all of the partnerships that we've been fortunate to build over the course of the past 7 months. Next slide. And then we'll go quickly through this one because I know we're very close on time. So this, again, just touches on these economic development components that I talked in more detail a moment ago. So next slide. Okay, we're going to just jump through this one because it calls back to regulation, and we can leave that for you to read on your own. So next slide. Okay, and here's where I'd like to spend the last bit of time I have with you. So I've talked about the government integration component of the strategy. This is it. We've identified 5 pilots that were in various stages of analysis and development with different partners on different ledgers with different protocols. These 5, our goal is to have in either the final stages of analysis or in development, and hopefully be able to hang our hat on one of them being a closed pilot by the end of 2017. So very quickly, I'll just go over at a high level instead of drilling in, but property deed recording, so land title transaction on a blockchain in partnership with Cook County Recorder of Deeds. Academic credentialing, putting a transcript on a blockchain so that an employer can ask a student for proof of this transcript without having to write in or go online to get access to a paper transcript that would be sent to the employer. Health provider registries. For a doctor to be properly licensed, there are about 5 or 6 reconciliation and data input points, rather, that need to be reconciled for that doctor to be compliant. That reconciliation process is incredibly difficult, and the idea of that being done on a shared, transparent ledger so that when you or I go to the doctor, we can just see some kind of a green check mark saying that our doctor is compliant with all of these the licensure points would be incredibly valuable. Something that I think this group in particular would appreciate are our interest in establishing an energy credit marketplace to take renewable energy credits that are typically traded OTC and actually put them on a chain, again, for transparency and auditability. Lastly, we're addressing the idea of identity, which we talked about in an earlier slide, through vital records, in particular birth events. So starting at the beginning to begin to understand how an identity is created, digitalized, secured on the web. So that being said, I know we're getting close on time, so I will just leave the presentation at that. I think the next few slides are probably contact details or a concluding slide.
All right, thank you, Jennifer. Very interesting. And it seems that Illinois is on the forefront of the blockchain and working across the state agencies to get it done.
Thank you. We are definitely trying our best.
So we have time for a couple questions. If anybody has one, please enter it again in the question section. In the meantime, Lawrence, you mentioned that that this has the ability to allow people to engage in their energy providers and utilize energy in a way that they haven't been able to before. How might programs like this impact current programs such as net metering?
That's a really good question. So current programs like net metering, even performance contracting for solar development, things like that are probably going to get more and more challenged as we go forward, because these technologies like this are going to make it far more efficient for you to be able to transact directly in real time with the market. So net metering itself is just a construct a construct that's in place that really pretends like the utility grid is a battery and is storing your electricity. The utility grid can't store electricity, so what's happening from a physics perspective is it's going on the grid and it's being consumed. If it's going on the grid and being consumed, then somebody could buy it as it's being consumed. So I think in the near future, we're going to see, well, I know here in New York, we're seeing net metering being phased out. But I'd say in the near future, we're probably looking at the phase out of net metering at some scale.
Okay. And Jennifer, at this point in time, where do you see the biggest benefit, or where do you think the biggest impact is going to come concerning the blockchain and how it's used from a government perspective?
I think hands down it's going to be around identity. I don't think that that's going to be immediate, and I think it's really important to couch couch a time horizon in all of these transitions, and especially in particular in these use cases. But in general, the idea of being able to hold your own identity and permission, essentially who you want to see what component of it, is a future state that I cannot imagine us not getting to eventually. So that will be a slower pull, but we will be moving in that direction, and that will be the biggest impact that this technology has upon the government, because we sit so squarely in the middle of identity issuance and verification currently right now.
Okay, great. Well, that takes up all the time that we have for today. I appreciate both Lawrence and Jennifer for the great presentations, very informative. And I think one of the things that many are doing is trying to understand this technology and how it could be used. And so perhaps in the future we can do, this is a suggestion for you, I think probably Sharon, is just maybe do a follow-up webinar at some point on specific use cases and exactly how it is being used in the world today, and the success that it is seeing and how it's working. So again, I thank everybody for attending the webinar this afternoon. And Sharon, do you have anything else to add?
No, I don't. I think the follow-up idea is a great idea, Commissioner Wagner. Just wanted to thank both Jennifer and Lawrence as well, and you also, Commissioner.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you everybody, and have a good day.
Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.